Welcome back to the Conveyance Desk. In episode 19, we covered foreign buyers and sellers, the cross-border attestation chain, the POA mechanics, the fund logistics. Today is episode 20. And this is a different episode. Less procedural, more reflective, because we have done 19 episodes on the mechanics of a Dubai property transfer, and it is worth, at the close of the first 20, stepping back to look at the pattern. Quick reminder, this is general educational content, not legal advice. What follows is observation, not prescription. Use it as a frame. Here's the framing. A property transfer is not a glamorous process. It is documentary, procedural, sequenced, and unforgiving of error. It does not look like the deal. The deal happens elsewhere. In conversations between buyers and sellers, in agreements over price and terms. In the moment, a property is identified, evaluated, and chosen. By the time conveyancing begins, the deal is already done. The buyer wants the property. The seller wants the money. The price is agreed, that the path forward feels obvious. But conveyancing is where deals quietly come apart. Not because the parties changed their minds. Because the documentary trail did not hold. 1. The pattern across 19 episodes. We have covered Form B and Form F. Banks and checks. The trustee office. Joint ownership. Closing day, the first 90 days. Mortgage cases, on both sides. Powers of attorney. Off-plan resale. HEBA transfers. Service charges. And NOC. Failure modes. Foreign parties. The pattern across all 19. Each step has its own documentary requirement. Each step has its own failure mode. Each step is sequenced into the next. A transfer is not one decision and one event. It is a chain of decisions and events. Each link must hold for the chain to hold. 2. Where deals fall apart. Deals do not typically fall apart at the offer stage. Or at Form F. Or at NOC. They fall apart when a documentary issue surfaces that the parties did not anticipate. A POA that does not match the receiving authority's requirements. A NERCode that expired before the transfer was rebooked. A settlement figure that was not refreshed for the new transfer date. A foreign buyer's funds that did not clear in time because the originating bank had compliance questions. A title deed with an undisclosed encumbrance that surfaces only at trustee verification. These are not catastrophes, they are friction points. But friction, at the wrong moment, can collapse a transaction that, on paper, was already done. 3. Why pre-flight checking exists. Every episode in the series has come back to the same idea. Pre-flight checking. Documentation reviewed against requirements before the appointment. Checks calculated against pre-confirmed figures. POAs reviewed for the receiving authority's specific compliance rules. Identity documents verified current. Bank coordination confirmed in writing. Pre-flight checking is the difference between a clean transfer and a failed one. It is also the difference between someone who is doing this for the first time and someone who has done it many times. The second category checks. The first category assumes. 4. The role of specialism. Most parties to a Dubai property transfer are doing it for the first or second time in their lives. A buyer purchasing a home, a seller exiting an investment, a foreign owner managing remotely. The frequency is low. The complexity is high. The cost of error is significant. This creates an asymmetry. The parties making the decision have limited exposure to the failure modes. The infrastructure they engage with, banks, developers, trustee offices, sees the failure modes daily. When the parties handle the documentation themselves, they bring single transaction experience to a multi-transaction problem. Sometimes it works. Often, friction surfaces that the parties cannot resolve under time pressure. 5 layers of representation. A typical Dubai property transaction can involve multiple layers of representation. Listing broker for the seller, buying broker for the buyer, a lawyer for one or both parties, a bank representative if there is financing, a developer representative for NAC, a trustee officer at the appointment. Each layer has its own role. Each layer adds its own coordination cost. When the documentary work is distributed across multiple parties, who do not coordinate directly, gaps emerge. The lawyer assumes the broker has confirmed the bank attendance. The broker assumes the lawyer has reviewed the POA. The bank assumes the seller has retrieved the original deed. The seller assumes the buyer has prepared the checks. Each is doing their part. But the spaces between the parts are where transfers fail. 6. Concentration of responsibility. The cleanest transfers are those where one party owns the documentary path, end to end. Not multiple parties partially. One party with a clear file, a clear timeline, a clear accountability for each stage. That party may be a documents clearing desk, or it may be the buyer or seller themselves, where they have the time and the focus to manage every detail. What matters is that the responsibility for the documentary path is concentrated, not distributed. A distributed responsibility produces gaps. A concentrated responsibility produces a chain that holds. 7. The boring transfer as the goal. A dramatic transfer means something was not handled in time. A boring transfer means everything was handled in advance. The checks were correct. The documents were complete. The parties were present. The appointment ran in under 2 hours. Ownership transferred cleanly. Nothing eventful happened. That is the goal. Drama in conveyancing is failure. Routine in conveyancing is success. 8. What this means for buyers and sellers. A buyer or seller approaching a Dubai property. Transfer should be thinking about 3 things. How experienced is the party managing the documentary path with this specific kind of transaction? A first-time conveyance is a different skill from a 10th-time conveyance. How concentrated is the responsibility? If multiple parties are partially responsible for the documentary path, gaps will emerge. Concentration matters more than seniority. How much margin is in the timeline? Transfers that are scheduled without margin for the unexpected are transfers that fail at the unexpected. Build margin into the timeline, particularly for cross-border cases, mortgage cases, and HEBA cases. 9. The close of the first 20. This series will continue. There are topics not yet covered, specific developer processes, community by community knock patterns, recent regulatory changes, particular failure cases worth dissecting. But these first 20 episodes have laid the procedural foundation. If you have listened from episode 1 to episode 20, you understand more about how a Dubai property transfer actually works than most parties going through their first one. You understand the forms, the fees, the checks, the trustee process, the mortgage mechanics, the cross-border layer, the failure modes, the pattern. The deal happens before conveyancing begins, but the deal holds or fails in conveyancing. That is what this series is about. The unglamorous work that quietly decides whether the property actually transfers. That's all for today. That was the close of the first 20. This was the Conveyance Desk.